Good afternoon. My name is Juan Salcedo, and today we'll be discussing hard metal contamination and the impact of industrial effluents on water quality in Ranipet, India. The purpose of today's discussion is firstly to identify the sources and causes of environmental hazards in Ranipet, assess the human health, ecological, and economic risks associated with the contamination, and evaluate existing and proposed mitigation and remediation efforts. We will be doing this by presenting data through various graphs, tables, and illustrations to tell the story of the contamination. Firstly, we'll start with an overview of Ranipet, India, its leather tanning industries, its history, then go into chromium and other contaminants, its human health impacts, ecological and economic impacts, current and proposed mitigation and remediation efforts, and lastly, summarize today's discussion. Ranipet, India is located in the Ranipet district of the Tamil Nadu state. It's a southern coastal region of India. Ranipet is an established industrial zone with a history spanning several decades. The area is a major center for leather export. Other significant industries revolve around leather making as well, including boiler auxiliary, chemical, ceramic, and refractory industries. Due to the reduced water level of the Palar River, residents rely heavily on groundwater for irrigation, domestic use, and drinking. Groundwater supplies the direct water needs of the Ranipet district. The population of Ranipet district is 1.2 million with a high youth population. 11% are six years or under. Quickly pointing out on the site map, you can see here on the bottom right, the blue dot represents the leather tanning industries in Ranipet. And we could point out here the close proximity to residential zones and agricultural areas in the town of Ranipet. The leather tanneries in Tamil Nadu surmount over 1,000 in the state and over 250 alone in Ranipet. Tamil Nadu is the industrial hub of leather in India. The industry employs over 100,000 and is the main economic source of the region and a main contributor to India's foreign exchange earnings. 60% of all leather in India and 30% of its exports comes from the Ranipet industrial estate. We could see on the top right the distribution of leather tanneries in India, and we could see here that Tamil Nadu has over double the amount of any other state in India. Looking at the line graph, we could see how valuable leather exports have become in recent years in India. Leather tanning transforms animal skins into stable leather products by stripping outer layers and treating the dermis with action agents. Tanning methods include vegetable tanning, chrome tanning, and eco-friendly tanning, with chrome tanning being the most popular, used by 80% of Indian tanneries because of its cost and time efficiency. Chrome tanning involves several steps: brushing, soaking, liming, reliming, deliming, and chrome tanning, producing large amounts of chromium waste along the way. The chrome tanning process produces significant amounts, which poses a risk of contamination to local water supplies and the environment. Because of this, it's considered one of the world's most toxic industries. Ranipet is highly polluted as a result because of this industry, causing numerous health, ecological, and economic effects. Before we dive into the contaminants and their impacts, let's examine a timeline of leather tanneries and environmental health concerns. Leather tanning industry started during the colonial Indian era, when it was brought in by the British. In 1975, a large factory came into Ranipet called the Tamil Nadu Chromates and Chemicals Limited Factory. This helped Tamil Nadu become a major center for leather production. But in 1995, because of widespread pollution and health impacts and protests, CCCL was shut down. In 2015, the Central Pollution Control Board flagged that the factory left mass amounts of hazardous waste that are contaminating local water sources. State and federal governments swung into action, but because of the high economic costs, conservation efforts have remained stagnant, even though several studies in recent years have found an increase in groundwater contamination caused by not only the factory, but by other small-scale leather tanning factories. The predominant pollutants from tanneries include toxic heavy metals such as chromium, cadmium, iron, copper, zinc, and lead. For this presentation, however, we will mainly discuss chromium, as it's the most pervasive and hazardous pollutant in tannery processes. But we will also touch on lead contamination. Chromium is a hard steel-gray metal highly resistant to oxidation, even at high temperatures. It's the sixth most abundant earth element found on Earth's core crust. Because of chromium's stability at high temperatures, it makes it desirable for industrial use. The health effects of chromium are related to its fading state at exposure times. Trivalent chromium, or chromium-3, is not highly toxic, and it's actually an essential dietary mineral. But when it's released into the environment during the tanning process, it oxidizes and becomes hexavalent chromium, or chromium-4, which is 1,000 times more toxic than chromium-3 and causes carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic health effects. Approximately 5 million people globally are at risk of chromium exposure, and more than 300 sites worldwide have been identified where chromium exposures pose a health threat. Effluents from tanneries and other chromium-based industries and improper disposal contaminate water, soil, and air. In water, the recommended level of chromium is 0.05 milligrams per liter. A study collected groundwater samples and found that over 50% of the water quality in Ranipet is poor or non-potable. Another study tested groundwater samples and surface water samples to examine chemical levels in the water. Looking at the graph here, we could see that the standard permissible levels for chromium is 50, but the levels in groundwater highly exceed that with 1,195. We could also look at lead, which is 5 times the permissible value in its groundwater sample, and over 30 times its value in surface water. Chromium enters into the environment through tannery effluents and contaminates water, soil, and air. We could see this diagram here to see how this occurs. The tanning process releases leather dust into the air. Direct dumping and improper sludge disposal seeps into surface water, such as the Polar River, and soil, eventually making its way down to groundwater. Here's a picture showing improper sludge disposal, which will then make its way into surface water and groundwater. Humans can be exposed via dermal contact, ingestion, and inhalation. Tannery workers are more likely to be exposed via dermal contact with chromium and inhalation of leather dust. This picture serves as an example of the dermal contact and inhalation that tannery workers face. The general population is most likely to be exposed by ingesting contaminated water and food. The human health impacts of chromium-4 are carcinogenic and non-carcinogenic, such as various cancers, such as lung cancer, nasal cancer, and sinus cancer, skin problems such as dermatitis, respiratory illnesses such as asthma and bronchitis, kidney damage, ulcers, and more. Lead toxicity can cause lung cancer, neurological damage such as irritability and hallucinations, reproductive issues, and more. Cancer Ranipet is the highest in India and is largely attributed to tanneries. We can see here that Chennai, the capital of Tamil Nadu, has the highest rates by far compared to any other Indian state. At the tanneries, workers are exposed to leather dust and suffer from irritation, nausea, vomiting, and muscle pain. Tannery workers have double the risk of morbidity due to exposure to leather dust containing high levels of chromium and other toxic chemicals. Children and infants are most at risk from exposure. Some pictures of examples of some of the human health impacts. The 2 pictures on the left show dermatitis effects from chromium contamination. The top 2 on the right show skin pigmentation, also from chromium contamination. And lastly, the bottom right image shows some birth defects where an individual was born with a blind left eye because of chromium contamination at pregnancy. Now we're going to look at the ecological and environmental impacts. Beyond human health impacts, hard metal contamination greatly impacts the ecology and economy of the region. Over 50% of the groundwater is non-potable. The toxicity of river water affects aquatic life, disrupting ecosystems and biodiversity. High bioaccumulation of chromium has been found in the muscle and gill tissues of freshwater fish, indicating significant contamination of river water. Animals consuming contaminated food or water are also adversely affected. For example, tannery waste rich in protein are used in manufacturing poultry feeds. This leads to animal loss and leads to the entry of toxic substances into the food chain, posing a major pathway for human toxicity. Looking at the economic impacts, thousands of acres of agricultural land are unsuitable for irrigation because of the toxic discharge from tanneries. Many farmers have complained that crop yield has decreased. Over 600 acres of agricultural land have been rendered barren to contamination. Contaminated lands leads to financial losses for farmers who rely on agriculture as their primary source of income. Health issues caused by exposure to contaminated water and soil result in increased medical expenses for affected populations. Long-term health impacts such as cancer and chronic illnesses will also contribute to economic burdens on their families and healthcare systems. Remediation efforts are also costly and may cause industry disruption, which the region highly depends on. Now we're going to look at the existing and proposed mitigation and remediation efforts. Most efforts focus around the TCCL factory. The Indian and Tamil Nadu governments are involved in cleaning up and disposing of this toxic sludge, but economic costs slow the process. The government actually requires more funds to safely dispose of the sludge. While holding and treatment tanks to properly dispose of effluent have become more common, many small-scale tanneries continue to improperly dispose of toxic sludge. To mitigate and reduce the impact, we should utilize health risk assessments results to develop suitable treatment technologies and refine regulatory standards. We should also enforce personal protective equipment and educational programs to ensure occupational safety for workers in tanneries. Many workers actually do not use PPE when provided because of uncomfort. Using low-cost absorbents such as coconut shell carbon, rice husk carbon, fly ash, and charcoal can also suppress heavy metal contamination in effluents before they're discharged into surface water bodies. We could also convert to vegetable tanning if it's economically feasible, or adopt more eco-friendly tanning options to reduce reliance on chrome tanning. We should also look into developing and implementing comprehensive strategies for the safe disposal and remediation of contaminated sites, including landfills and water bodies, and encourage industries to take responsibility for their waste and engage in proactive measures to reduce environmental contamination. So that's the environmental contamination that's going on in Ranipet, India, and the human health effects that are occurring. To recap, Ranipet is the leather tanning hub of India. Its leather tanneries cause major water contamination and adverse human health effects. Chromium and lead exposure have resulted in high cancer rates, reproductive dysfunction, respiratory problems, and other issues. Contamination has also resulted in biodiversity loss, decreased crop yields, and economic downturn. While cleanup efforts are ongoing, more needs to be done to quickly mitigate and eliminate contaminants. This was my discussion on Ranipet, India. Thank you so much.